My family always relied on me financially, but as soon as I stopped helping, I became the villain. Years of support ended with me being labeled selfish. I had often felt unnoticed. For example, on birthdays when Mark received expensive gifts while I got something practical like socks or a coat, or during vacations when all the attention was on his family while I remained on the sidelines. I tried to justify my parents, thinking that was just how they were. Besides, I had always been independent and didn't need extra attention. After Mark married Becky and their son Jason was born, things only got worse. Mark wasn't just the favorite anymore. He was the one who gave them a grandchild, and that made them happy. Even though the feeling of invisibility in my own family never left me, I was happy for my brother and kept reminding myself that family helps family. But that's when everything fell apart. At the end of last year, Mark lost his job. His company was one of the first to shut down during a wave of closures. I genuinely felt bad for him. I remember Becky calling my parents in tears, worrying about how they would survive on her modest bakery salary. The situation was tough, especially since, surprisingly enough, Mark wasn't good with money. My parents decided to help him, but their decision was unexpected. Instead of supporting him in finding a new job, they invited his family to move in. On the surface, it seemed reasonable. Families support each other in difficult times. The problem was that the space they so generously offered belonged to me. It all happened on a Sunday evening. I had just returned from a long business trip, exhausted, dreaming only of a shower and bed. But the moment I stepped inside, I sensed something was wrong. My parents were waiting for me at the kitchen table. Dad, as usual, was silently fiddling with his watch, while Mom looked anxious. "Sarah, honey, we need to talk," she said tensely. I dropped my bag by the door and sat down. Mom didn't beat around the bush. "You know how hard things have been for Mark. He has a family, kids, and nowhere to go." My heart sank. I already knew where this was going, but I still asked, "And where are they going to stay?" Mom smiled as if she had rehearsed this conversation 100 times. "The basement suite is perfect. It's separate from the main house, so they'll have their own space. Becky and the kids will be comfortable there." I tried to process what I was hearing. Wait, my basement suite. Where am I supposed to go? Dad finally spoke, though quietly. "We set up the hobby room for you. It's cozy, and there's plenty of space." I couldn't believe my ears. The hobby room was a glorified storage space, filled with Mom's sewing supplies, boxes of seasonal decorations, and half-finished projects. It wasn't a bedroom at all. Hoping it was some kind of joke, I asked, "You're kidding, right?" Mom immediately became defensive. "It's only temporary, Sarah. Besides, this is our house, and we have to make decisions that benefit the family as a whole. You'll be fine." That was the key phrase. "It's our house." I sat there in shock as my parents congratulated themselves on how generous and caring they were. I didn't argue. There was no point. I didn't like it, but the decision had already been made. Mark was moving in, and my feelings didn't matter. That evening, I packed up my essentials: laptop, clothes, toiletries. I looked around my small basement suite, which had been my home for years. It wasn't perfect, but it was mine. My favorite scented candles, cozy blankets, bookshelves full of literature. Now all of it was being taken away to make space for Mark and his family. The worst part? No one even asked me. The decision was made for me, as if my opinion was completely irrelevant. By the next morning, I knew I couldn't stay. So I made a plan. I booked an affordable all-inclusive stay in the Florida Keys for the 2 weeks I had off between work trips. It wasn't luxurious, but it was the best I could do under the circumstances. Spending money on food and saving $1,600 from a property I no longer lived in also brought me something even more valuable: peace and tranquility. 2 things I desperately needed. My parents seemed indifferent when I told them about my plan, but the real conflict didn't begin until I left. Even though my mom simply said, "Well, if that's what you need to do," things quickly escalated. 2 days into my vacation at the resort, my phone buzzed with a message from my mom. "Mom, hey Sarah, where's the money for rent and groceries this month? We're counting on it to help support Mark and the kids." I stared at the message in disbelief. She couldn't be serious. Surely she understood. I called her back, and the conversation went something like this. "Me, Mom, I don't live there anymore. Why would I pay rent?" "Mom, because we're still family, Sarah. You know we're all struggling right now, and Mark needs that space more than you do." "Me? But you gave away my space. I'm not even there." At that moment my dad joined in, his voice firmer than usual. "Dad, you can't just abandon your family like this. We raised you better than that." It was like talking to a wall. No matter what I said, they repeated the same argument. I was selfish. I was turning my back on my family. I had a responsibility to help Mark. Then Mark called, adding his voice to the pressure. "Mark, Sarah, you don't understand. I have a family to take care of. You don't need the space like we do." That was the last straw. "Me, Mark, when you had your job, did you ever send mom and dad money to help out? No, you spent it all on yourself. So why am I supposed to bail you out now?" He fell silent. By the time the call ended, I was shaking with frustration. I had been holding everything together for years, helping my parents, covering expenses, being responsible, and for what? To be pushed aside, and then accused of being selfish for finally standing up for myself. That's when I realized this wasn't about supporting my family. It was about control. They turned on me the moment I refused to play a role I had never agreed to. Out of guilt, I sent mom $400 for food, but that was it. I would no longer sacrifice my well-being to sustain their expectations. At the time, I didn't realize this was just the beginning. My decision to stop paying for a place I no longer lived in sent shockwaves through my family. I had no idea how far my parents and relatives would go to pull me back in. If I thought the guilt trip from that first phone call was bad, I was in for a surprise. The Florida Keys Resort was supposed to be my haven, a place to relax and clear my mind. For once I wasn't paying $1,600 for a basement suite I had been forced out of. Instead, I had everything I needed in my small rented bungalow. Good food, a beautiful poolside view, and most importantly, peace. It felt like a taste of freedom, something I had longed for, but never truly understood until then. But that peace didn't last long. My phone wouldn't stop buzzing, missed calls, endless texts. On the third day, another message from mom arrived. "Mom, Sarah, we're disappointed in you. This isn't what family does. Dad, it's not fair to leave us struggling like this. Are you only thinking about yourself? Mark, really, Sarah?" Every message felt like a punch to the gut. It was obvious Mark had joined my parents' campaign to wear me down. At first I ignored them, thinking they'd eventually stop. But the texts didn't end, even when I reassured them that I needed time. Then came the phone calls. Out of frustration, I finally answered one. Mark's voice came through, laced with practiced disappointment. "Mark, you know what you're doing to mom and dad, right? The house is expensive, and now they're trying to help me and my family. You're making it worse by leaving. I don't understand how you can be so selfish." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Me? Selfish? Mark, you took my space. I don't even live there anymore. Why would I keep paying for something I don't have? Mark, it's not about space, Sarah. It's about family. I have kids to think about, and you don't. You should be helping more, not running away. The audacity was overwhelming. Here was my brother, who had mismanaged his finances for years, telling me I owed him money to support his children. I ended the call. At that moment, it was the only response I could manage. By the end of the week, I felt trapped. Even though my parents lived 1,000 miles away in Riverside, their words followed me everywhere. Every time I checked my phone, a new message was waiting, their tone shifting between guilt and anger, expressing anger, guilt, or a strange mixture of both. Mom texted me, "Sarah, think of Jason and the kids. They're just little boys. Do you really want them to suffer because you're being stubborn?" Dad followed up, "You owe it to us. We took care of you when you were younger. Now it's your turn." Mark added his voice, "You'll regret this when the kids remember how their aunt turned her back on them." The messages weren't the only problem. My extended family began reaching out to me too. I started receiving calls from relatives I barely knew. Uncle Gary, Aunt Linda, and others I hadn't spoken to in years. Aunt Linda's message was particularly difficult. "Sarah, honey, I'm sure you don't mean to upset your parents like this. They've done so much for you. Can't you just help a little longer? Mark really needs it right now." I wanted to scream. A little longer. What was a little longer? 1 more month? A year? Forever? I had been paying more than my fair share for years, but it seemed like no one cared. The day after I returned from the Keys, things escalated further. I was unpacking when there was a knock on my apartment door. I opened it to find my parents standing there, my mom holding a heavy folder in her hands. She looked exhausted but resolute, and my dad, silent as usual, loomed in the background like a quiet threat. I was stunned. Mom, Dad, what are you doing here? Mom stepped inside without waiting for an answer, and Dad followed her in. We need to talk, Mom said as she swept past me into the living room. I had no choice but to let them in. They sat down on my couch, and Mom started laying out documents on the coffee table. Once she opened the folder, I immediately knew what they were: supermarket receipts, repair estimates, and utility bills. Sarah, she said, we can't do this without you. Look at these expenses. The mortgage is still due, the roof needs repairs before winter, and Mark's kids need school supplies. We need your help. I stared at her, stunned. I don't live there anymore. Why should I pay for any of this? Dad shouted. Because you're part of this family. Our family sticks together when times are tough. You don't just run off when things get hard. I could feel my anger building. You didn't ask me, Dad. You didn't ask how I felt about giving up my space. You just decided for me. And now you want me to keep paying for it. That's insane. Mom's tone softened, but the manipulation was still clear. Honey, think of Jason and Liam. They don't understand why their aunt isn't helping. We just want to keep this family together. That was the turning point for me. I realized this had nothing to do with groceries, mortgages, or even Mark's kids. This was about control. I had always been expected to be the responsible daughter who would keep everything running smoothly for my parents. But now that I wasn't playing along, they didn't know how to react. I stood up and gestured toward the door. I think you should go. Mom's eyes widened. Sarah, no. I cut her off. I'm serious. You need to leave. Dad looked genuinely shocked for the first time in all these years. They never expected me to resist. We're just trying to do what's best for the family, Mom said as they slowly walked toward the door. I didn't answer. I locked the door behind them as they left, and then sat down on the couch, trembling. All I could think about was my family's expectations, my own desires, and the years I had spent being the good daughter. I had covertly sacrificed my financial independence for their comfort. But now, I realized I was done. I had been facilitating this for years, and it wasn't my responsibility anymore. I had been helping them ever since I started making money, but the more I contributed, the more they expected from me. Mark's poor financial management wasn't my fault, and I had no obligation to fix it. But breaking free was not going to be easy. I had already told my parents to back off, but they weren't going to stop. I would have to fight for my life if I wanted it back. I decided that I would help them when I could, but I would no longer let them dictate my actions. If I didn't live in the house, I wasn't going to pay for it. I wasn't going to feel guilty about refusing to pay for Mark's mortgage or his children's school supplies. The next morning, I sent my mom one final message. I can't continue to pay for everything. Even though I love you, I'm not an ATM. I'll help when I can, but please respect that. Less than an hour later, I received her reply. Mom, I can't believe you're doing this to us, Sarah. We're family. I didn't respond. For the first time in years, I felt like I was taking control of my life. I thought that after this final step, they might give me some breathing room. I was wrong. The next phase of this conflict came when my family organized a virtual meeting. Everyone with a phone and an opinion had a front row seat to my trial. As expected, an email was the first step. Mom, Sarah, we've scheduled a family meeting for this Sunday at 3 p.m. It's important. Your aunts, uncles, and cousins will be there. Please don't miss it. That was it. The passive-aggressive tone was unmistakable. They were using the meeting to humiliate me, making it clear that they believed I should be there, as if my presence was the only way to fix everything. They thought that gathering the whole extended family would somehow fix the situation, that if they applied mass pressure, I would change my mind. I almost decided to completely ignore the meeting and let them shout into the void. But I knew deep down that doing so would only strengthen their story. Sarah is avoiding us because she knows she's wrong. So with a heavy heart, I set an alarm for 2:55 p.m. and reluctantly joined the video call. When the screen loaded, I saw my parents, brother Mark, Aunt Linda, Uncle Gary, cousin Rachel, and a few other relatives who only showed up at weddings and Christmas dinners. The looks on their faces told me everything. I was about to be torn apart. Mom didn't waste time and started right away. Her voice sounded fake, filled with concern as though I were a lost child, not an adult who dared to put herself first. "Sarah, we're all here because we're worried about you and the decisions you've been making lately," she said. I stayed quiet while they prepared their speeches. The next 30 minutes were filled with guilt-tripping and accusations from every corner of the screen. Aunt Linda spoke first. "Sarah, we're family. You can't just turn your back when people are struggling. Mark and the kids need support right now. We all help out when times are tough." Uncle Gary added, "Your parents have done everything for you. Now when it's your turn to step up, you're acting like it's too much to ask." Aunt Rachel chimed in. "I want to be independent too, but you can't just cut off your family. That's not how we were raised." Then Mark spoke, his voice full of feigned hurt. "Do you know how hard it is for Becky and me right now? The kids don't understand why their aunt suddenly doesn't care about them. Jason asked me the other day why you don't want to see them anymore. What am I supposed to tell him?" That hit hard. I adore my nephews, but I knew Mark was manipulating the situation, using them as a weapon to paint me as a cold-hearted monster. Finally, after what seemed like hours, they gave me a chance to speak. My palms were trembling, but I took a deep breath and unmuted myself. "Listen," I started, trying to keep my voice steady. "I love this family. I do. And I've been helping for years, paying rent, buying groceries, doing whatever I could to keep everything running. But this is too much." Mom's expression tightened, but I kept going. "I don't live at home anymore. You gave away my room without even asking me, and now you expect me to keep paying for it. That's not fair. You're all acting like I'm abandoning you, but I'm just trying to take care of myself for once." There was silence in the room. I wasn't done, but I saw Mom shaking her head, getting ready to respond. I turned to Mark and said, "You're my brother, and I care about you, but you've never been responsible with money. When you had a job, did you send money to Mom and Dad to help out? No, you spent it on yourself. And now when you're in trouble, suddenly I'm the bad guy for not bailing you out." Mark remained silent, and I turned to the rest of the family. "Where were you when I was the one keeping everything afloat? None of you had anything to say when I was paying $1,600 a month for a basement suite. I only lived in half the time. But the second I set a boundary, I'm suddenly selfish." The ensuing silence was deafening. Uncle Gary was frowning. Aunt Linda looked scandalized, and Mom was about to cry. Dad refused to look me in the eye, sitting there with his arms folded. Finally, Mom said something. "Sarah, we just don't understand why you're acting like this. This isn't like you." That was the last straw. I didn't wait for an answer before saying, "This is me, Mom. I'm just not the doormat you've gotten used to." With a satisfying thump, I closed my laptop after selecting leave meeting. Texts started coming in immediately. Mom wrote, "You didn't have to humiliate us like that." Sarah said, "We were just trying to have a conversation." Mark said, "You've changed. I hope you're happy leaving your family behind." Aunt Linda wrote, "I can't believe how disrespectful you were to your parents." I ignored them all. I no longer owed them an explanation. But despite my sense of justification, guilt gnawed at me. I had always been the good girl, the responsible daughter who never got into trouble. It felt strange to stand up for myself, like I was breaking some sacred family law. I sat on the couch with a glass of wine that evening, trying to process everything. As I reflected, it became increasingly clear that this was about more than just money and space. It was about control. My family had relied on me for years, thinking I would always comply. As soon as I left that role, they turned on me. I had no regrets about what I said during the meeting. It was the first honest thing I'd said to them in years. If anything, I knew the worst was still to come. My family wasn't going to give up silently. This was just the beginning. Things didn't calm down after the family gathering. Perhaps I was naive, but I thought that my finally standing up for myself might cause them to back off, give me some space, and allow time for reflection. I was wrong. My refusal to back down only made things more intense. If anything, I felt as though I had poked the bear, and now it was using all its strength to claw back. And boundaries were not something my family respected. They saw them as obstacles to be overcome. The efforts to pull me back into the fold became increasingly intrusive. The manipulation grew bolder, and the guilt trips escalated. A few days after the family gathering, My coworker Sam stopped by my office as I was finishing a customer report. "Hey Sarah, some woman called reception asking for you and said she was your mom. I left a message with Emily, but I think you should hear it." I felt a wave of dread. Emily handed me a sticky note with a confused look on her face, and I followed Sam to reception. The message read, "This is Sarah's mother, Nancy Evans. We're going through a difficult time, and I need to talk to her about some pressing family issues that may be affecting her ability to concentrate at work. Please urge her to take this seriously. Thank you." I froze, staring at the message as if it might burn me. My mother had contacted my workplace, not to check in on me, or because of an emergency, but to leave a note implying that I wasn't doing my part to support the family. I felt both embarrassed and furious. I crumpled the note in my hand, my face burning. Sam smiled awkwardly. Everything okay?" I nodded stiffly. "Yeah, it's fine. Just family stuff." But it wasn't fine. That night, I called my mother. "Why would you contact my work mom? That's completely inappropriate." She sounded angry, as if I were the one being unfair. "I had to get your attention somehow. You're not listening to us, Sarah. Maybe hearing it from someone at work will make you realize how serious this is." What I was hearing was unbelievable. "My work has nothing to do with you, or Mark, or your bills. You can't drag my professional life into this." Mom didn't hesitate. "We're your family. We come first. You need to start acting like it." "No," I answered firmly. "I don't. I need you to respect my boundaries, and I need you to leave my job out of this." She laughed. "This isn't about boundaries, Sarah. This is about family loyalty. You're abandoning us, and you don't even see it." I ended the call. Arguing was pointless. Nothing I said would make my mother change her stance, as she was completely consumed by her narrative. The next morning, I woke up to a barrage of notifications. Without even looking, I knew it was my brother Mark. He had posted something on Facebook. His initial post was vague enough to stir pity without giving any specifics. "Mark Evans, you discover your true family during tough times, when it's inconvenient for them. Some people lose track of their roots, even though we're trying our hardest. It's hard when some people refuse to help." The comments poured in. "Mark, keep going. You're doing great. Family is the most important thing. One day, those who disappoint you will regret it. Toxic people don't need to be in your life. Focus on your loving family." The best part came when Mark himself sent me a direct message. "Jason is constantly asking why you don't come anymore. Are you okay with me telling him that his aunt doesn't care about him?" I sat there staring at my phone, feeling both angry and heartbroken. I loved Mark's kids so much, but I hated the way he used them as a tool against me. Yet I also knew this was classic Mark, playing the victim, seeking sympathy, and making me look like the bad guy. I chose not to respond. I refused to play his game. It was only a matter of time before my parents tried something else. I should have expected it. I was enjoying a rare quiet moment that Saturday morning, sipping coffee, when someone knocked on my door. When I looked through the peephole, my heart sank. There they were, Dad and Mom, standing on my porch, Mom holding a manila envelope. I considered pretending I wasn't home, but I knew they wouldn't leave. I took a deep breath and opened the door. "What are you doing here?" I asked, without waiting for an invitation. Mom pushed past me, and Dad followed. They walked into my living room as though they owned the place. Mom took a seat on my couch and began laying out receipts and bills on the coffee table. "We need to talk about finances," she began. I rubbed my temples. "Mom, we've been through this. I'm not paying for a house I don't live in anymore." With a stern voice, Dad chimed in. "Sarah, you don't understand. We're struggling. Mark's struggling. The roof needs to be fixed before winter. And there are school fees for Jason and Liam. It's not just about you." I exploded. "It's always about me, Dad. It's about what I can give, what I can pay for, what sacrifices I can make to keep everyone else comfortable. Well, I'm done. I'm not your ATM, and I'm not responsible for Mark's problems. We're not asking for much, Sarah. Just $2,000 a month to help with the basics. Is that really so unreasonable?" Mom countered, her voice cracking. Stunned, I stared at her. You think $2,000 a month is not much. Are you hearing yourself right now? The conversation quickly turned into accusations and manipulation. Family is supposed to help each other. Mark has kids to think about. You just don't understand because you're single. I had enough. You need to leave. Mom looked at me as if I had slapped her. They gathered their things and left, slamming the door behind them. I collapsed onto the couch, feeling like I had just run a marathon. My head was pounding. I kept replaying the argument. Mom's tears, Dad's disappointment. But I wasn't betraying them. I was just exhausted. I was tired of being the good daughter who sacrificed herself for everyone else. That night, I made a promise to myself. No more giving in. But they weren't done. They spread rumors, painting me as selfish. Relatives started calling and texting. Your mom is heartbroken. Uncle Gary pleaded. Are you really going to let Mark's kids suffer? My cousin Rachel wrote. Mark fanned the flames on social media. Some people say they care about family, but when times get tough, they disappear. Then my mom called my office. My boss pulled me aside. Is everything okay? Shame and anger washed over me. Work had been my safe space, but now even that was invaded. By the end of the week, I was drained. On Saturday, I heard a knock on my door. I already knew who it was. What are you doing here, Mark? We need to talk, he said sharply. No. Leave. You're abandoning your family. Mom and Dad are heartbroken. Something inside me snapped. I never abandoned anyone. You just assumed I owed you. But I'm done carrying your burdens. He was speechless. Go home, Mark. Take care of your own family. I'm free. I realized I had to break this cycle. The next morning, I called my friend. Jess, I'm moving. Good. You deserve this, she said. I applied for a job transfer and chose Charlotte, North Carolina. On the day I left, I wrote a short note and left it behind. I can't keep living this way. Even though I love you. One day, I hope you'll understand. I don't know if they ever will. But as I drove down the highway, for the first time in years, I felt free. I chose myself, and that was enough. Thank you for watching. Subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with more real-life stories.